When I compared 3 dot grid 160 GSM notebooks towards the end of 2023, I favoured the Scribbles That Matter journal over my Archer and Olive and my Notebook Therapy 160 GSM notebooks. This was a difficult decision, and despite the slightly faulty construction of my Scribbles That Matter notebook, I favoured them just slightly over the other two notebooks because they had started using forestry certified sustainable paper, and they had started their journey by signing up to a climate pledge scheme through Amazon. Quite some time later, I've filled up most of my 160 GSM Scribbles That Matter journal with a record of my board games that I play. That's what it looks like. And it was time to try another journal, and I thought, look, I'll stick with the theme and stick with Scribbles That Matter, but I'll give the 120 GSM journal a go. I'm interested to see how the lighter weight paper, the 120 GSM, compares to their 160 GSM paper, and I also thought it was time to check back in on Scribbles That Matter to see how they've gone with their sustainability journey. I'm Ruby from the Useful Journal. I do rather special dot grid journal reviews that are loved by people that want to know how their journals will perform and also want to know about the company they're buying the journal from. Today I'm reviewing a 120 GSM dot grid notebook from Scribbles That Matter that is the Pro version, which is the plain cover. And I will talk to you about the company and their products. I will check in on their approach to sustainability and corporate social responsibility. I will look at the construction of the journal, the features and markings of the journal, and I'll talk to you about the paper and the results of my pen test. Along the way, I'll throw in some comparisons to the 160 GSM iconic version of the Scribbles That Matter journal, just because I think you might be surprised at the results. Scribbles That Matter are a UK-based company, but don't seem to have a UK website anymore. They now have an EU website, which is basically Europe. They have also got their American website, and of course they're widely available through Amazon. Their notebooks are manufactured in China. They offer free shipping, which is often a side benefit of a drop shipping enterprise, but there can be some quality issues because there's less checking over the products before it's sent out. Scribbles That Matter also sell a few different planners with planner type markings, and they have a journaling pouch that you can put your journal and tools and supplies in, which I quite like, and I've always been tempted to buy but just haven't ever done it. So they have a couple of other products. They do also sell their pens in packs of 5 if you want more of them. I don't think the price of a Scribbles That Matter journal varies as much on their proper websites as it does on Amazon. I was able to get this Scribbles That Matter Pro version for nearly half price. Only 2 months later, and it's back up to $60 Australian, and for some reason now the 160 GSM version is nearly half price. This discount was part of the reason I bought the Pro version, but in the end I'm happy to be able to compare it to the iconic. But it varied journal by journal and colour by colour, so the price of the purple one was cheaper than, say, the pink one. So I don't know how the specials and discounts work, but basically if you're buying through Amazon, just keep an eye out for the sales and keep an eye out for if there's any sales on the colour you want, and eventually you might get lucky. They do occasionally have sales on their proper STM websites. They're just not like 50% off. They're a small amount off. The 120 GSM notebooks do tend to be the same price as the 160 GSM notebooks. Just keep in mind that the 160 GSM only has 156 pages, whereas the 120 GSM has 216 pages. So you're looking at the difference between, say, 23 cents per page, 21 to 23 cents a page, depending on what you buy the 160 GSM for, compared to about 15 cents a page for the 120 GSM. That is at the full ticket price, not discounted. So there's a substantial difference in price for the two versions just because you get more pages in the lighter weight paper. You do also always get a free pen with the notebook. That's the pen there. It's a great pen. I've used it a lot in my notebooks. I always write with it in my 160 GSM notebook. It's a great pen. It lasts pretty well, and that comes free with the notebook. So that, along with the free shipping, does make this quite a good value notebook compared to some of the equivalent brands. When I reviewed the 160 GSM version in 2023, Scribbles That Matter had just achieved certification from the Forest Stewardship Council under their certification scheme, which guarantees that the paper has come from sustainable forestry. They have since let that certification lapse, so the paper is no longer FSC certified. They had also made a climate-friendly pledge through Amazon's scheme. Now, this meant that they were going to look at their climate emissions and other environmental impacts from their products, and they were working towards getting a badge from Amazon saying that they were climate friendly. They have also let membership in this scheme lapse. This is really disappointing to me because this was the one thing that I felt made them stand apart from Archer and Olive and Notebook Therapy, who both don't have any environmental schemes or certifications. So now all three are on a level playing field, which isn't good news for Scribbles That Matter. I kind of feel like this has just been a greenwashing effort, which is where companies just do something that looks green and then kind of ride on that wave of goodwill for a while, not bothering to tell people that they've actually stopped doing it. They just carefully remove any mention of it from their media. They remove the FSC stamp from things, and like they just kind of quietly fade it away and hope that no one notices and hope that everyone remembers that, oh yeah, they joined that scheme and they're environmentally friendly. So I can't stand greenwashing. I think it's just laziness and taking advantage of people. They also provide no information about corporate social responsibility other than to say that the products are made in China using good business practices. I have no idea what this means. It gives no other detail. And I'd just like to see brands, I know it's a big effort, but go to the country, the factory where their products are made and just check that there are ethical business practices and that there are good working conditions for the people that work in those factories. This, of course, is all a big thumbs down for me because I work in sustainability, and this was the one thing I felt separated them quite clearly from Archer and Olive and Notebook Therapy, and now it doesn't. I do still like the journal itself, so let's have a little bit of a talk about it. Even though I bought the Pro version of the notebook, it still came in the highly decorated cardboard slipcover with the iconic design, and this was wrapped in thin plastic wrap. The notebook had a paper belly band and came with a free pen and a cardboard bookmark grid guide, which I find really handy and have started making my own version for some of my other journals. The notebook cover is leatherette and is stamped with STM on the spine. It's otherwise plain, but it's dressed up a bit by the contrast elastic closure. The closure feels a bit loose, but has still left an imprint on the edges of the front cover. There is a pen loop that they now also brand with STM, which is a new thing. It's secured by a stud on the back cover, which I don't love. There are 2 ribbons that match the cover colour and the contrast elastic colour. They're just long enough to get around the corner of the book. The rear pocket extends all the way across the back cover, so no lumps felt through the pages, and doesn't have any gaps for stickers to slip through. The edges of the pages are plain, the corners are rounded, and even though there are 216 pages in the 120 GSM compared to the 156 in the 160 GSM notebook, thanks to the lighter weight paper, the journal is the same width and it's only 20 grams heavier at 545 grams. Scribbles That Matter notebooks have a stitched binding and don't have a joint next to the spine. This is also called a French groove and helps turn the pages and also helps prevent the spine from cracking. The notebook lays flat when opened except at the joins between signatures where the pages sit up a bit from the spine, reducing the width of just those 2 pages. The gluing is neat though, with no tearing and always even with no exposure of the binding. This is much better than I expected after the poor quality of construction of my 160 GSM notebook, which among several things had the pages extending a bit beyond the cover and the gluing between the signatures was quite uneven and sometimes you could see the binding through the gap in the pages. Nothing's fallen out though. On this 120 GSM notebook, the pages sit evenly inside the cover and there's even a headband to secure the ribbons, which look like they'll stay in place for a long time. Despite the issues with its construction, my 160 GSM notebook has been durable and I've lugged it along in my bag to games night many times. I'm sure the 120 GSM Pro version will be similar, although I do think that the cover will show scratches more than the iconic version because the leatherette is a bit softer and plusher. The upshot of all this seems that the Scribbles That Matter brand can be a little bit inconsistent in the quality of their notebooks. I've had 2 good ones and 1 bad one. I'd be interested to know whether other people have had a bit of inconsistency in the quality as well. Scribbles That Matter focus on having markings in their journals for people that are into bullet journaling. The Pro version has the key chart on the inside front cover and then an owner page, although it doesn't have any detail, just lines. There's 4 index pages with index written across the top and the lines marked by complete lines, they're not dotted. This is different to my 160 GSM, which doesn't have index written at the top, but it may just be a new design for all their notebooks, I'm not sure. If you don't want the word index there, you can just cover it up with spare paper or a sticker. There's no future log pages. Straight after the index, you go into the dot grid. There's page numbers, and then each page has a marker for the middle of the page and midpoint for the width and length of the page. At the back, there is a pen test page, but other than possibly being useful to see what colour your pens will turn out on this paper, the fact that it's glued to the end paper means it's way thicker than the rest of the pages, so it's no good for testing ghosting or bleed through for your pens. The dots are of average darkness. There are 27 dots across the page and 39 down the page. They're well aligned across the pages. The page numbers sit outside the grid, which goes reasonably close to the edge of each side of the page and is 1 grid distance from the centre, meaning it works well for spreads that you want to go across a double page. The results of this pen test have actually made me question, do we need to go for the 160 GSM version when the 120 GSM paper performs pretty much almost as well? It even has enough stability that I'm confident in using it to do paper cutting and Dutch door spreads. The 120 GSM paper is white. It's smooth but has a little bit of texture, which gives a pleasant amount of feedback when writing with a fountain pen. The fountain pen ink lays down well on the page and doesn't show through even when using a stub nib with dark, wet ink. My fountain pens didn't feather, and there's a definable difference between the fine, medium and stub nibs. The paper works okay with watercolour, but does show spots, especially when you use a wet on wet technique or you just use a lot of water. It does much better when you use less water. There's definitely more page crinkle for the 120 GSM paper than there was for the 160 GSM, but the watercolour still doesn't go through the page. I won't say the 120 GSM paper is perfect. While the 160 GSM had no bleed or ghosting, this one has a little. Of course, the alcohol-based Sharpie Ultrafine showed through the page, as it did for the 160 GSM, and the calligraphy ink I used on Snoopy's feet also showed through, but these two things often show through paper. The stamp pad ink didn't show through. The Tombow water-based brush pens mostly didn't show through except on one tree here with the lilac colour. I'm not sure why it showed through on this one and not the others. I would have thought the magenta colour was the most likely to show through, and it didn't. There were no other issues with bleed or ghosting. The pencil erased with minimal shadow left on the page, and wiping my hand across the page after using a Pigma Micron pen was possible without smearing after 10 seconds, which is average but much slower than the 160 GSM, which was dry after 3 seconds. There was a tiny bit of smearing when highlighting over the Micron pen. All options for whiting out mistakes worked well with this colour of paper. Generally, all the pens look good on the paper, and even pens with quite sharp tips like my Zebra Sarasa pen didn't push too hard on the paper and show a ridge on the opposite side. So the thinner paper really didn't affect the results at all. When Scribbles That Matter first came out with their 160 GSM paper, they ditched their 120 GSM paper that had been incredibly popular, and there was this huge outcry about it. And so eventually they brought it back. I have no idea whether the 120 GSM they sell now is the same quality as that original paper, but they do now offer the two alternatives. I'm pretty happy with it. I have to say the main reason I would choose the 160 GSM journal is sometimes I just want a journal with less pages. Most of the time now, journals come in 192 or more pages, and you might have a purpose that, first of all, doesn't need that many pages, or sometimes you just want to fill up your journal and get to start a new one because it's so satisfying filling a journal. The 120 GSM paper had perfectly satisfactory results in terms of bleed and ghosting. It didn't make my fountain pen inks feather at all, and it's okay with watercolour as long as you don't use too much water. The construction of this 120 GSM notebook was fine, but the construction of my 160 GSM notebook has made me a bit cautious about the brand, and I'm not sure about the consistency. Despite the faults on my 160 GSM notebook, it hasn't fallen apart, so it's still fairly sturdy. In terms of aesthetics, I do prefer the iconic version. I just like the added texture and interest on the cover. Yes, some of the graphics are a little bit young for someone like me, but you don't look closely at the graphics most of the time, and I do prefer that look. I just find the plain cover of the Pro version a little bit bland, so I might have to decorate it with stickers or paint. To finish up, I am dreadfully disappointed that Scribbles That Matter has abandoned the environmental efforts they started making, but I'm not completely surprised. Overall, I'm really happy with my purchase. I do like the notebook. It's always been the company that's bugged me a bit. I would say if you're going to buy one, do keep an eye out for the specials on Amazon. As I make this video, the 160 GSM is half price in my country, in Australia. So yeah, just keep an eye out and see if you get lucky. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, watch my other journal reviews, and you might also pick up some ideas on how to use your journals and record and organize aspects of your life. See ya!